Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Alex Van Gils, and I'm one of the hosts of the weekly Dharma Gathering. Tonight's session will be led by Dr. Shanté Smalls and is titled, Am I Bullshittin'? Relating to Others Authentically. Shanté will lead us through a guided meditation, a Dharma talk, and we'll close with a question and answer session. Tonight's session will be recorded, so if you prefer not to be seen, please turn off your camera feature. Please note that you'll also be recorded when asking a question. And the recording of tonight's gathering will be accessible within 48 hours via your purchased products on the Vimeo site for weekly Dharma Gathering. And you'll receive an email notification once it's posted. Dr. Shanté Paradigm Smalls is a teacher and student in the Shambhala School of Vajrayana Buddhism. Shanté began studying and practicing Buddhism at age 17 and has practiced in Zen, SGI, and Shambhala communities. Shanté began on the teaching path in 2009 and was authorized in the Shambhala tradition to teach meditation and Buddha Dharma in 2015. Dr. Smalls teaches Dharma and meditation in a variety of locations, including Dharma centers, conferences, corporations, and colleges and universities. Shanté is focused on the healing impact of contemplation and meditation in Black communities, people of color communities, LGBTQ communities, and prison and recovery communities. They are a teacher on the Liberation app, and they also teach regularly on weekly Dharma Gathering online, which they co-founded and curate. So thank you very much, Shanté, and I'll turn it over to you for the guided meditation.
Everyone can hear me? Thank you all for joining tonight live. Those of you who are live and can make it, and also welcome to the people who are watching this recorded. Will be watching it recorded. I just wanted to, before we get into the formal guided meditation, I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be in a position to not only have heard the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha Shakyamuni at a young age, but maybe even more so, I mean, hearing the Dharma means that I could study the Dharma, practice it, but it's a real honor and privilege actually to be able to teach about meditation, Buddhist meditation, and Dharma principles. So I feel always a sense of excitement and some humility and also some nervousness, of course, around sharing. And I'm also really excited because I have this really cool new microphone that I got for doing podcasts. And so I feel really excited about the technology. Today's been a bit of a difficult day for me. I'm moving to Atlanta temporarily in 10 days for 10 months. And there are a lot of details related to moving and subletting the place I'm in right now in Brooklyn, my apartment, and money and phone calls and saying goodbye to people and work. I'm finishing a book. So there's a lot going on. And I was feeling a lot of agitation when I woke up this morning, and a lot of energy, a lot of neurotic energy, a lot of anxiety, energetic anxiety. I have actually anxiety disorder. So not that kind of anxiety, that's a little deeper, but the more up I was really here, and I was worked really hard to come in my body. I went on 2 walks this morning, did yoga, I meditated a few times today, had a couple of conversations with friends, and I really began to settle. I actually meditate 3 times today. It took me a while to settle in. And I think that that's really awesome that today I'm giving this talk about being authentic, you know, and not bullshitting myself and other people about what it means to, or what it feels like to practice in spiritual practice. So I'd like to offer a bit of a guided meditation that's going to be kind of like the teaching too. So the first aspect of relating authentically to others, to our environment, and to ourselves is first relating to ourselves and checking in with what's going on in our body, our emotions, and our thoughts. And this checking in is just bringing our awareness and our attention to how our body feels, our physical body, without trying to change it or judge it. Oh, I need to adjust, or I'm tight, that's bad. Just noticing what's going on in our bodies, and that we have bodies. And just so you know, we can't awaken without the body. And then touching into just what's our emotional state, what's our feeling state, good, bad, medium, up, down, happy, sad, or the shades of all those things. And just noticing that, acknowledging that, and even appreciating that. So body, emotions, and then just noticing the quality of our minds. Perhaps the mind is settled, perhaps it's quite active, perhaps it's somewhere in between. Just having a little bit of check-in. What's the geography of my experience right now? Without judgment, we just are noticing the lay of our internal landscape so that we can orient ourselves in our practice or in our day. That's just the basic tenet of awareness and attention, sometimes called mindfulness, but I want to move away from this emphasis on the mind and more on present. And after we just have a sense of where we are, we begin to just settle into our seat, soften the front of our body, relax it. Let the back of our body be our strength. Balancing that open heart, that soft heart with the dignity of a strong back, a flexible spine, the thing that holds up our entire body. Relaxing our face, relaxing our chest, relaxing our stomach. Sitting upright, but not being, oh, I'm meditating now, so I've got to be perfect. No, we relax into our very human posture. And we let our body and gravity do the work. If we slump, we don't have to get rigid. We just notice, oh, I'm slumping. If we're too rigid, we just slightly soften. Everything is without judgment or panic or fear of getting it wrong. And when we've relaxed into our seated position, the soft front, a strong foundation, seated foundation, and a strong back, we just turn our attention to our breath. We've already been breathing, and we pay attention to the feeling of our body breathing. We don't have to manipulate our breath. We don't have to have any special breathing, just the breathing we've been doing all along, all day long. But here we pay attention to it. We notice it. We remember that we're breathing, and we notice what that feels like. And here it's the whole body. We're not just focusing on the nose or mouth. We're feeling the breath throughout our entire body, a global experience. We're reminding the body and the breath that they are old friends, and that they are interdependent, that they work best when they synchronize, that they have a love affair with each other, the body and the breath. Feeling. And when we allow our body and breath to sync up with one another, it creates a really incredible resting place for the mind. The mind can take its seat in the synchronized feeling body, in the body that's feeling itself breathe. The mind can relax into that situation. The mind can feel safe, but not hidden. And as body, breath, and mind reunite and remember their precious relationship, we can relax with bodily sensations arising, emotions arising, or thoughts arising. Because we're feeling all of that. We're feeling our body. We're feeling our breath in the body. We're feeling our mind resting. Without shame, without embarrassment, or if shame and embarrassment rise, we welcome them. That's okay. You have a place here. Thoughts are arising, no problem. Make room for them. The body aches, that's okay. Acknowledge it. And we feel what we feel. And this quality of feeling, whatever that complex ecosystem is happening for each of us, is actually the language of being a sentient being, particularly being a human being. It's not thinking or doing, it's feeling. Feeling is the quality that allows us to notice or be mindful. It's not the mind trying to catch thoughts or experience, it's feeling. And when we feel, we notice. And when we notice, we can be present with what's happening. And we begin to cultivate judging our experience less. And here we can even drop the technique and just feel what we're feeling, letting it radiate out into the world. Whatever that feeling is, maybe you're feeling in your heart center or your belly or your back, just let it dissipate into the world. Let it connect you to your environment and to other beings. Let it not be selfish, but let it be the state of all things, which is we are nature. And we're not trying to keep anything to ourselves selfishly. We're trying to face the world with that quality of feeling. So, good evening again. So this title, the title of this talk is a little tongue in cheek, but it's also comes from some observations of myself, my own behavior, and observations of others. But first, let me start with myself. Particularly, so some of you know this story, and I apologize for telling it, but but repetition is part of the deal. Plus, I'm getting older, and I like to tell certain stories. But I came to really be interested in Buddhism at quite a young age for a Westerner, for who was not raised in a Buddhist community. I was raised in an evangelical Christian community, which actually shockingly and surprisingly has served me very well in terms of being a Buddhist practitioner and going on retreat and having to wake up at really horrible early hours because my mom used to wake us up during the school year at 5:45 a.m. to do morning devotions. She would like read the Bible verses to us and pray over us, and we were really annoyed by that. But it prepared me actually in a very interesting way for this discipline I've taken up. But I was very interested in learning about how people around in different sort of faith or philosophy systems saw the world, and I was introduced to meditation by some young Dharma punks. I'm not even sure if that community is around anymore, but these young guys who were like punk rock guys and rock climbers were like, yeah, meditation is so cool. And I was like, yeah, you know. And I think I, like many people who grew up in the Western Hemisphere without exposure to Dharma, only knew was a martial artist. I took martial arts classes as a young person, and so I was very it's like a little Asiaphile when I was young, and I was really into martial arts film. So I only knew sort of what I saw of martial arts representations of like Chan Buddhism, Chinese Zen, and so it was very obviously topographical and bad, but I was really interested in what I saw. And I began meditating, and I was also in recovery, still am, as a young person. So through recovery, I was introduced to meditation, Buddhist meditation. And for many years, I have to admit, I was really on some bullshit. I had a lot of books, you know, I read a lot because I love to read, and I somehow became an academic. And so reading has always been a real balm for me. But that escape into reading usurped actual practice. So I was the kind of person, I hear people say this, I would sort of practice in emergencies or when I was really in trouble or really felt badly. And it was quite helpful. But as I once heard my teacher say, you know, meditation is more like drinking a glass of water every day or brushing your teeth every day rather than like a holiday where you do something special. And I found that to be really true for me. So I was in high school and then I went to college. And in college, I got a little bit more serious because I had my own space and my parents weren't like, maybe that's a whole other talk, but they weren't like regulating my spiritual practices. And I bought little things and I made an altar, a shrine. Just sort of like different things that were important to me, that were felt sacred. And I would practice in front of that shrine. I practice meditation. But I was very outwardly oriented. So, so much of my life, especially in my teens and throughout my 20s, was about how I appeared. And being a Buddhist meditator, being a meditator in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was already known as someone who was in recovery in high school school. So that wasn't cool. And that messed with my cool cred. So I didn't want to also be a weird Buddhist, you know, even though I wanted to be. And I was very concerned with being cool. I was very popular in high school. I was very, very popular in undergrad. And I was, you know, really concerned about my social life, my sex life, you know. And then on the side, very sneakily, I had this whole entire life that was very robust around a spiritual life, where I worked with a spiritual mentor, and I brought meditation and different recovery meetings to prisons and to jails. And I read a lot of, and I worked really hard, but that was like on the low. And I really just wanted to be a cool kid. And I was a club kid. I was a go-go dancer. I did a lot. I did a lot as a Buddhist go-go dancer. You know, and as a queer kid and as a trans, you know, kid, I was really trying to fit in. So much of my life was about persona. But when I moved to New York in the late 90s, I very quickly got very deep into meditation practice. And I had an incredible amount of rage and anger. As a dark-skinned Black person who was assigned female at birth, who had experienced an incredible amount of misogyny, anti-Blackness, anti-Black femaleness. And then as someone who was really struggling still at that point with being trans and had a lot of internalized transphobia and homophobia, and felt like the spirits, the Dralas, or at that time, you know, God had put a lot on me. Queer, trans, Black, dark-skinned, you know, female-bodied, recovery. It was just, I just was very angry, and was angry at the things, the violences that would come at me daily. And also my internalized violence. And so I had this kind of split where I spent a lot of my time practicing yoga, working out, meditating, going to 12-step meetings. But I was so angry. I mean, I was like, really up until probably a decade ago, probably less, I was really good I was the person you saw cursing people out in the street in New York, always. I mean, if there was someone getting into a fight in the street, on the subway, it was me. And I felt this real gap between the spiritual life that I was really trying hard to cultivate in my 20s, which was very difficult, and the way I kind of behaved in romantic relationships and friendships, at work, and in the street, everywhere. And it was as if my spiritual practice was like a vestment or a garment I would put on. It's not that I wasn't serious about it or committed to it. It just was so hard to do all the time. My habits, my anger, my tendency towards violence was so habitual and so well, it had gotten me what I wanted in certain ways, kept me protected. It felt like that it was hard to give it up. And so in the early 2000s, I started practicing. I had been doing Zen, but you know, kind of by myself and kind of dropping into places, so not really practicing. And then I really got involved with one of the Nichiren Daishonin schools, Soka Gakkai International, the Nam-myoho Renge Kyo chanters. Maybe you've seen Tina Turner. If you've seen that movie, you've seen Tina Turner as a famous SGI. And Nichiren Daishonin was a 12th century Buddhist monk in Japan. And he was pretty, his view of life was pretty bleak. But he really did an incredible amount of work around the Lotus Sutra. And I did that practice for a couple of years, and I started to feel this more integration. And I started to feel less shame and embarrassment about being a Buddhist. And I was going to the SGI Center in New York on 15th Street, like almost every day, or like 4 or 5 times a day. Practicing during the day, practicing at home, really got my, altar shrine together, and reading Buddha Dharma, books by the president then of SGI, Joseph Ikeda, and then I started reading Pema Chodron and Chogyam Rinpoche. And through that, I really started having a deeper spiritual experience and an integration. And I felt like I can't do these practices and then walk out the door and act like a lunatic. I started to feel real pain at doing that, internal pain. And the practice itself of practicing daily, when I really started on daily practice, began to really wear down my habitual patterns. And I really began to become more cognizant of my aggression toward myself and towards others. And it was quite shocking. That eventually led me to reading Pema Chodron and Chogyam Rinpoche. Eventually led me to the Shambhala Center of New York, and where I began to practice, where I took Buddhist vows, where I took refuge vows and became a Buddhist. I took Bodhisattva vows and vowed to work for the wakefulness of all beings in this lifetime, all past lifetimes, all future lifetimes, and put other people's wakefulness before my own. So it's, I did not know I would become a Buddhist teacher, but there you go. And one of the things I learned or began to observe in myself as I really began to engage with Sangha, one of the 3 jewels, the Buddha as an example, the Dharma as the teachings of how to live, and the Sangha as a community of practitioners, but also, as I like to call it, an irritant, a mirror, a source of sometimes frustration, a source of love, a source of pain, a source of friendship. What I began to notice in the Sangha, and I began to take that on, is posturing. And every Sangha I've been in has done this, has their own pitfalls of posturing. Here, we do it this way. So we sometimes, or communities I've been a part of, can get the things, the forms that are meant to free us and open us up and break open our hearts and connect us to other people, can become traps where if someone doesn't know how to do it or does it the wrong way, they chant the wrong way, or they don't bow the right way, or they whatever, a way we start to gaslight people, or we start to spiritually abuse people. Or it can become a situation where, I'm a practitioner, and so I don't have to worry about this complaint you have against me because my intentions were good, and let's just Buddhaize it and everything's fine. That's your problem. Or I'm having this struggle because life has pain. And I was listening to a talk this morning by Sebene Selassie on the Liberate app, and she was saying this great thing that, she was talking about the 4 Noble Truths, and that pain times, I think she said resistance was the word, resistance equals suffering, right? Pain is guaranteed, suffering is optional, as they say in 12 Step. But I'm having this pain in my life. I must not be meditating enough or doing enough practices or enough prostrations or enough whatever. I'm going to do that, or enough yoga. So that's the bypassing aspect. And so in the Sangha, I was being taught a lot of really great things, but I was also being inculcated in the culture of Sangha, which sometimes in the West, particularly in the United States, can be very competitive, is rife with a lot of repression. And I'll attribute that in part because a lot of Western Sanghas that aren't Asian or aren't ethnic Asian are majority white, and white culture in the United States is repressed. And so that's part of the Dharma, is that there's a lot of repression of feeling, of honest conversation. There's a lot of niceness, but not kindness. And so I felt on the outskirts of that, but I felt like my behavior had to be a certain way I was also in my 20s at the time. And so my late 20s, early 30s. And so the young people at the time, we weren't really that welcome. And we were also assholes. So, you know, and we wanted Dharma to be really vibrant and to reflect our generation and our Gen X, and then soon millennial, or it was Gen Y then, but now they're millennials, practitioners. So I was thinking about this, my experience in Sangha, thinking about my experience as a teacher, and thinking particularly about the ways that there's a kind of idea of a Buddhist practitioner or a meditator or a yoga practitioner or whatever, and people try to fit into this mold or this archetype rather than to work with where they are or work with where I am. And particularly when I started teaching, part of teaching in the beginning is like mimicry. So I would teach in the ways that I saw people teaching. So I was like teaching on death and suffering and the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths and the Three Jewels. And I love all that stuff. But then I was like, what about like just teaching with that stuff as the background and as the foundation, but teaching really from the heart. Teaching really from a place of vulnerability and softness. Teaching from a place of humor and kindness and my own personality or my own aggregate way of being in the world that, you know, changes and grows, and not about disrespecting the Dharma, but it's all sacred, seeing it all as sacredness. So I swear, you know, I talk about sex, I talk about my foibles. I've started actually dressing down, which is very interesting. Sometimes I dress up, but playing with that, is the dressing up a concealment or is it respect? So asking these questions. And then there's criticism that comes with that, which is good. I welcome it. That's excellent. If everyone likes me, I'm a charlatan. And that's not what I'm really concerned about. What I'm really concerned about is being a vessel. And this becomes particularly difficult when a few weeks ago in July, I was, you know, on social media, some of the, particularly Facebook, they'll like, your memories will come up. And there was a memory from 3 years ago, I think. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and a year ago in July. And each June, or it was June or July, I think it was July, there was some really major event that I had commented on in the Buddhist world, in the Tibetan Buddhist world. Not only, but one was I think 2 or 3 years ago, was a very famous Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Sogyal Rinpoche, was in some controversy around and had to step down from his leadership around spiritual abuse and sexual abuse and financial abuses. The next year, 2017, was another a Buddhist teacher who was, I think he was a insight teacher, died of a drug overdose. And like a week later, another Tibetan teacher in the Kagyu tradition had to step down because of abuses. And then last year, my teacher, a report came out with his history of abuse, sexual abuse and misconduct. So I was struck by this cycle of memories and feeling this feeling of, were these people just bullshit? You know, were they just faking it? Were they just lying? We have this idea of Buddhist teachers as so holy and so perfect and so above human, or I have this idea, human. If someone says they're practicing, I believe they're practicing. And people are practicing, and I am practicing, and yet I do things that hurt people. And Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche has this in his new book, which I'm forgetting the title of, but it's about his experience with death when he went on a 4.5-year wandering retreat. And he realized that he left his temple and he was like feeling very trapped by his position as a Rinpoche and as an awakened teacher. And then he said he got, to the next town and no one knew who he was, and they weren't bowing to him and saying, "Oh, sir, Rinpoche." And he was like, why aren't they, And I was like, yeah, right. And so for me, when it comes to really practicing, I have to ask myself, am I living my life in a way that's about this authentic presence, where I'm not trying to use my spiritual practice to escape from my embodiment and the experiences that come with that, where I'm not, sometimes people will like, oh no, Buddhists, we're supposed to be apolitical. Never. The Buddha himself transformed politics. In his first address to, he was talking to the Brahmins, one of his earliest addresses, and they were saying, hey, Gautama, which was his name, what's going on, dude? You haven't been doing your practices, And he says, hey, I'm awake. You don't address me as that name. I'm Buddha. And, I've got something to tell you. And this way of being, this Brahmin structure is not, I'm not going to teach that way. I'm going to teach everyone who wants to hear. So he transformed the world by saying, I'm not going to participate to the extent that he could, in the caste system where the Dalit, or the untouchables as they were used to be called, couldn't, if they heard the holy teachings, their ears would be cut off. So there's no room to be apolitical when the Dharma or Hinduism in the past was, you weren't even allowed to hear the teachings. Of course it's political. Of course it has to do with power. Buddha welcomed women. Into his practice. The woman who gave him milk and saved his life became a nun, a principal student. He thought about animals and other beings. So these are all things that we've politicized, but it's about being thoughtful about the world and the environment. So this idea that we don't think about the world as it informs community and as it informs our interconnectedness. We're not just interconnected and that's okay. The Amazon is on fire and that impacts us. Oxygen is not like, oh no, I'm not political, But many times inside of any group of gathering of people, you have power dynamics. And so we need to be aware of those. You have conflict. How do we deal with conflict? How do I deal with conflict? Am I just on some bullshit where I practice, and then how I deal with people on a just regular basis looks like I've never meditated in my life? And it's not about being perfect. It's about being genuine. Having genuine experiences. Sometimes that means we have to leave communities or take space from them. Sometimes that means we have to start our own stuff. Sometimes that means we have to love from afar, practice from afar. Sometimes that means we take space from our teachers. I love you, and get your shit together. Because this practice is really, let me just say the ultimate thing. If I'm on some bullshit, when the moment comes when I die, I'm dying. But even before that, when hard things come, sickness, old age, I can't deal with them because it's been a ruse. I can't deal with the death and the certainty of death, mine and the death of all things. I can't deal with change. Even the change in seasons can be difficult, irritating. Even kindness, even the change in relationships or status can be world altering. Because I haven't really felt my humanity. I want to hoard what's good. I want to push away what's I don't like, and I want to be indifferent to the rest. Passion, aggression, ignorance, 3 poisons. I don't want to hear what doesn't conform to my world. I don't want to speak lest I lose my position and power. Learning how to relate authentically for me really starts with synchronizing my body, my breath, my mind, my emotions. And then when I walk out the door, or even before that, when I relate to my dog, when I relate to my plants, when I relate to my environment, just here in my apartment, and then when I go outside, how am I relating? Am I checking out? Or am I trying to constantly come back to being present with whatever's happening? Oh man, feeling irritated, feeling exhausted, feeling exuberant, feeling anxiety, as I started out saying, feeling today, my mind was just, I'm like, okay, made my list of my to-dos. Okay, I've got to email this person. I call this person who's coming to see the apartment for sublet. Oh, this is not working out the way I want it to work. And I'm like a Virgo rising. So like, I'm really into things being lined up ahead of time. And that doesn't always work. So I just want to leave you with 2 little quotes that are helpful thinking about this. So one is the principles of warriorship. Warriorship here meaning our authentic presence, relating authentically, our confidence, our fearlessness, meaning not without fear, but our engaging fear with courage. The principles of warriorship are concerned with learning to appreciate all processes, all mundane reference points. So everything that's going on in my life, appreciation means relating to it. That's by a gentleman named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who's a controversial figure still, even though he's been dead for many years, but he had some good things to say. And without him, I really wouldn't be where I am, even though sometimes I get mad at him. I think he's okay with that. The second is, we are waking up together with and against the grain of each other's practices, and it could get messy. That's by Dr. Yasmin Sayedullah, who's in Radical Dharma, in the book Radical Dharma. And she really talks about the way that we need to deal with the mess in relationship to each other, particularly people who are in community, in spiritual community together, instead of repressing and faking and then gossiping behind each other's backs or starting a coup or having factions, but really making space to say, I don't like what you say. You know what? I don't like you. But you're here and I'm here. What are we going to do about that? We're both trying to make something happen. I don't like the way you go about it. You don't like the way I go about it, but we both want to be here and we both deserve to be here. How do we work with when I can't stand you? You know, that's real. Not, oh, I'm a Buddhist, so I should like everyone. No. But I can work with, it's like a sibling thing. You may not like your siblings, but it's like we might be sharing space sometime. How do we work with, I can't wake up without that irritating person. That's what sucks. I need them. But it has to come from a place of real genuineness, not fake. Oh, I'll be nice to them and then I'll tell, oh, I can't stand them, which I've done. Sometimes I preface it with, in the spirit of gossip. But, you know, working with right speech to be authentic. So I think I've said enough. I'm really would love to hear what you all have to say, or if you have any questions or if you have any thoughts, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanté. So just so everyone knows, I've set it so that everyone can unmute themselves if they'd like to ask a question, or you can also write it into the chat box. And if you're having a hard time unmuting yourself, you can just write in the chat box that you have a question, and I will turn your mic on.
Hi, Shanté. It's Anne. Hi. I have a question. Can you hear me? Okay. Just talking, the last thing you talked about I guess, authentic and right speech and being very genuine, even saying things that might be hard to say and hard for the other person to hear. It seems to me that kind of only works if the whole group, whomever's in the conversation, kind of all are working with the same rules, the same expectations, right? And I think that I find sometimes, you know, the response isn't, okay, yeah, I hear you. You can't stand me. You know, I'm not that into you, but we need to work together. It becomes very defensive, right? So how do we create those spaces so those kind of genuine conversations can go on?
That's a really great question. And I think it's a really important one because there are skills. It's not just, oh, I'm a practitioner, so I have those skills. I'm a big fan of, and whenever, particularly when I do retreats or even meetings, or even as not so much on this online forum, but even as I teach in the university setting, community agreements are really important. So they're self-generated, they're generated from the group. It's sort of like, what are the principles we as a community, whether we're a community for an hour, for 2 days, forever, you know, for 15 weeks, what are the things we value and how do we hold each other accountable to those? So sometimes, a lot of it's speaking from the I perspective. Things like people who speak a lot, maybe they can step back. People who sometimes are shy about speaking, step forward. Recognizing power dynamics, all kinds of different things. So you generate them every time. And then sometimes if I'm leading, I will offer confidentiality, you know, things like that. Using people's proper pronouns, making room to make mistakes and making room to correct people. And it's not about the space being free from conflict. The community agreements help to create a space that can hold conflict. And they're not rules, and they're not laws, and you're not going to get in trouble if you break them. It's sort of self and community regulated. We're saying they're reminders. They're reminders of mindfulness. Don't just call someone what the pronoun you want to call them because that's what you're habitually used to. Don't just call someone some name because you can't remember their name. Ask their name. Can you remind me of your name again? Instead of like, oh, I should know their name. I'm so terrible. I'm the worst. You become self-centered. Can you remind me of your name again? Oh, man, right. Thank you. Maybe we were name tags, right? Not just doing our habitual thing. Oh, I'm a hugger. I'm not. I'm just going to hug people. No, you know what I mean? So you create space. What is the space? What is the enlightened society we're trying to create in this space? We don't all have the same orientation. We don't all have the same history. We need to come up with some things and then we agree to each of these things. I agree. I'm gonna work with that. And resistance always comes up, you know, but it's good to have, you know, you write them up and it's like, just remind yourself, we agree to these things. We're accountable to each other and to ourselves. We're accountable and responsible for our behavior in this space. This is what accountable and responsible human beings do. And I like people say, there's a newer term emerging in the last few years. It's not safe space or even a safer space, it's brave space. So that this creates a context where we can be brave about or courageous about our experience. We can allow conflict rather than doing the habitual thing of repression, gossip, sublimation, side conversations, but we can be authentic with kindness. Not just niceties, but really like, you know, like you're really hard for me. And that may take time, right? That's not just like, we just met an hour later, I hate you, you know, like that. But this is really about, you know, when you're together for a day or a weekend or a week or a month, or you're in community with each other, we're really working with these principles. This is something I gave a talk a few months ago about sobriety and meditation. I talked about the principles of not just the steps, but the traditions where the groups really work with these principles, that we try to abide by them so that you have some guidelines, because we all are like wild, you know, we come home, relax, you know, that's great. But when we come together, what is the stuff that's holding us together? We need to have a container. So you know about this. This is a principle, container principle. How do we hold the space? And then how do we each, responsible for that? And not, oh, remember agreement number 4, but just reminding each other. It's a practice. One of my good friends, Gendon, who's a monastic, he tells me these great stories because everyone thinks, oh, you're in a monastery, you're in an abbey. They get on each other's nerves too. And so it's community, you know, you're working with its practice. And I think where the trouble comes in, where the gaslighting and the bypassing and all that comes in, is when we assume, instead of it being a conversation or a dialogue where we check in, it's just, here's how you do it. It's a dead thing rather than being relational. Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategy and Pleasure Activism, says that, I don't know if she said this or she got this from someone. She may have gotten it from Alicia Garza, so I apologize. But one of them says, movements, any movement, or we could say community, moves at the speed of relationship. And relationship moves at the speed of trust. So slowly. Thank you, David. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, Shanté. Hi, thank you. Oh gosh. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for your talk and the meditation. I was in that last question thinking about, I have this idea that very similar to what we were just talking about, in spaces where I find myself where there aren't community agreements or spiritual principles, because I often find myself in those as well. I have this idea that I will go and find a space that will already have all of this wonderful mindfulness, and then I'll live without conflict, and it'll be easier. And so I'm right. And so I'm thinking about maybe resiliency, or something about, yeah, staying with, there are places where I must go or that I want to be that have conflict, that in these areas that we're talking about. And how do I don't know, do you have any thoughts on sticking with it or being resilient, or maybe being a leader in that space? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, one question I've been asking myself, particularly around, so I work in, and you were adjacent to this space before, but I work in the academy. And it's a hard space. It's a very, it's not even neck up. It's like here up, maybe like frontal lobe, like, and there's a lot of violence that comes from disembodiment, from hegemonic whiteness, from patriarchy, from homo and queer and trans antagonism, from classism. There's just a lot of violence in those institutions. Many of them were built by the labor of either enslaved or migrants, or have connections to religious institutions that sometimes, were really shitty. So there's a lot of ghosts of pain and violence. And I think when I was a graduate student, I had a lot of high hopes about I was going to transform, and then it was sort of like spitting into a tsunami or something, and it was really a bit of hubris because smarter people have come before me and died as a result of trying to do all that. And I really had to find, remind myself, what was my purpose? What did I want to do in that space? I wanted to write, research, teach, and really work with students of color, first-generation students, queer and trans students, a lot of students who have been overlooked or who felt that they weren't traditionally smart or whatever. And, in my particular job, the area I really focus on putting my efforts in is working with empowering graduate students, getting more resources for them internally, helping them to get more resources externally, mentoring. I can't transform the entire institution. I can't transform the college that my department's in. I can't transform my entire department, but I can work in this one area. That's why I really do my service in my department. And I think that, like, getting really specific rather than trying to, for me, it's more of I have to really work with ego that wants to, because the downside to ego leadership is the burnout and is the violence. And so I just like something very specific rather than I may help move things an inch, or I may help one or two people rather than I come in there and wave my wand and everything is better. It may be just whispering in someone's ear who has power, because I don't have the energy or power or position to do that thing. But I could say, I could give that person an idea, and then they have the power to make it happen. That's how coalition works. That's how community works. And I think for me, it's really about maintaining a sense of, or working with a sense of my own. Resiliency is a tough word, because I think sometimes resiliency, we weaponize resiliency against ourselves. And it becomes like a way of not recognizing our own pain. So I like to think of it as a kind of warriorship, where I'm grounded in the gentleness and the wakefulness and open-heartedness. A warrior is gentle and strong. So I'm not trying to change the whole world. I'm not trying to save the whales. I'm not trying to eliminate all single-use plastic, right? I'm just, you know, in 1 week, I'm just trying to do my part. Like, what am I doing in my home? What am I doing in my, how am I welcoming? Who can I partner with? Who can I build coalition with? I find that much more helpful than the kind of way that capitalism has oriented us each into trying to be, each of us working in our little silos, not together. There's really something completely anti-capitalist and anti-US about things like Buddhism or even 12-step, where community is what's valued, right? And the individuals within that community, of course, are important, but we're valuing what we can do as a community, as a sangha, rather than, you know, and building that sangha at work takes work. I feel really fortunate to have that, you know, across, we have like queer and trans faculty that do work together. We have Black, Indigenous, POC faculty that work together. You know, people from the business school, people in the sciences, you know, we're working together, not just the humanities people. And that took work, you know, coalition, Slack groups, WhatsApp app groups, conversations, spending time with each other outside of work, visioning. And it's hard, and sometimes it's depressing, and sometimes I need a break. That's the other thing I'm going to say, is that the self-care aspect and the stepping back aspect of that is also really important. And saying to your colleagues or your comrades, I need to step back for this next 6 months. And I'll you know, I'll be on the sidelines and I'll do a little this and that, and I'll, you know, maybe I'll do the technology, but I need to step back from some of this work, and I need to really rejuvenate. So that's why it's good to have a coalition of people. That's why it's good to have transmission, right? So instead of it being like one leader and then the followers, it's like we're training each other in leadership, passing it on. It's a lineage. So that's the difference between a lineage and kind of like a dictatorship or something. It's like you're training your, as my friend likes to say, you're training your replacement always. And so I find that really, really helpful, to not hoard kind of resources and to really share. That's how things get done. Yeah.
Well, unless there's maybe one more question, we could close for the evening. Well, thank you, Shanté, and thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's weekly Dharma Gathering. Please join us next week for a gathering on Wednesday, August 28th with Dr. Hun Lai. for a talk entitled Between the Four Noble Rumors and Four Noble Truths. You can find more details for that at a link that I'm just about to paste into the chat box. And if you misplace that link, you can find it on weeklydharmagathering.com. And make sure to follow us on Instagram at Weekly Dharma and on Facebook at Weekly Dharma Gathering. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you all. Be well. Take care of yourselves. And definitely come to Dr. Lai's. Hun he's a Lama. He's amazing. I know him from North Carolina, and he has his own center in Asheville, North Carolina, called Urban Dharma. So you can look him up. He's a really great teacher. Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.